So, good day everyone. We are the group 4, and for today, our group will discuss about the global demography and global migration and global citizenship. But first, I'm going to introduce myself. I am Danu Raffles, and I'm here to explain the theory of demographic transition as it affects global population. Um, a theory of demographic transition is a theory that throws light on changes in birth rate and death rate, and consequently on the growth rate of population. Along with the economic development, tendencies of birth rate and death rate are different. Why? Because of it, growth rate of population is also different. Demographic transition is a phenomenon and theory which refers to the historical shift from high birth rates and high infant death rates in societies with minimal technology and education, and especially the economic development. So, in here, the demographic transition theory is a generalized description of the changing pattern of mortality, fertility, and growth rates as society moves from one demographic regime to another. In this picture, as you can see, it is a model of demographic transition. The theory of demographic transition predicts how a population will change over time in regards to the mortality and fertility rates, as well as age composition and life expectancy. All factors must be taken into consideration when studying a specific human population. These include the progression of population, growth rates, fertility and mortality rates, pattern of migration, and the differences of economic. The factors are responsible for the timing and speed of these drivers of demographic change. So in this picture, mortality rate means a measure of the frequency of occurrence of a death in a defined population during a specified interval. Fertility rates is the ratio between the number of live births in a year in the whole female population of childbearing age. And lastly is the total population, which is the overall population in that area. So, all in all, the demographic change result in a slower growing and older population. This transition will likely put downward pressure on the growth rate of potential output, the natural rate of unemployment, and lastly is the long-term equilibrium interest rate. The potential output refers to an economy's productive capacity in a physical sense, and this will not help us to improve our economic fastly because of its changes or transition that is happening in our society. And also, the magnitude of these effects and the timing are uncertain. One, it's because they depend on complicated dynamics and the behavior of consumers and businesses, and the demographic transition or changes may also affect the business cycle and the monetary policy transmission mechanism.
So, good morning, sir. Good afternoon, good afternoon. So, I'm going to talk about the factors underlying global movement of people displayed first-hand knowledge of experience of OFW. So, what are the factors that affects our OFW? Sample is the politics, the culture, and the social culture. So, in the Philippines, deeply rooted perceived culture of immigration has made moving abroad common, acceptable, even desirable as an option or strategy for a better life. For a decade, sizable numbers of Filipinos have left home in search of permanent settlement or temporary work overseas. Trends long attributed to the fragile economy and exacerbated by the frequent natural disaster. Today, more than 10 million Filipinos, or 10% of the population in the Philippines, are working and or living abroad. Uh, while a market improved economic situation in recent years has not diminished the outflow, it has allowed the country to move beyond its long-standing labor migration policy to incorporate migration into long-term development planning, ensuring that the regeneration of overseas Filipino workers, or OFW. When the Philippines launched the Overseas Employment Program in 1970s, the thrust was finding labor markets, and state not only promoted Filipino workers to the oil-rich but labor-short Gulf Cooperation Council, or GCC countries. It also saw this uncharted Middle East destination of Filipinos by the latter half of in 1970. As deployment of competition with the origin countries increased, surfacing labor migration problems, including poor working conditions and abuse by employers. So, these are the most problems that we encountered in our fellow OFWs. So, promoted by the government address migrant welfare and protection as a destinations diversify with women joined by labor migration flows. The protection aspect assumed more importance by the government subsequently developed a number of institutional laws. So our government act fast because of this rapid cases about abuse by the employers or abuse by their bosses. So our government developed an institute of our laws or policies aimed enhancing the protection of OFWs and their families. Spurred by the civil society advocacy, this dual approach of facilitation and protection contribution to making Philippines a major resource country of workers and talent of the global labor market, while also providing protection to OFW. The success of this approach, however, may have trapped the Philippines into complacency. Large and steady flows of remittance have become the country's lifeline. The Philippines ranked third after India and China as a major recipients of remittances in 2016. The country received a US of 26.9 billion in money transfer according to the Central Bank of the Philippines. There are concerns and reliance on remittances may have delayed in implementations of needed reform. So, as all know, especially we seafarers, we are one of the biggest that sends money here in the Philippines. Recent attempts to link migration to policies. We develop policies demonstrate our remarkable shift in governance in the Philippines, earning positive reviews from the international community after several boom and bust decades in the thousands. The Philippine economy entered a period of impressive growth between 2011 and 2016. Gross domestic product, or GDP, grew by average of approximately 6% yearly, and the economy proved resilient through political crisis and transitions. Not less than the positive economic news has not slowed or halted the migration. This is likely because Filipinos have more resources to migrate, and though the economy has grown, unemployment has yet to be tempered. The sustainable development that provide decade works opportunity continues to elude the Philippines. This country profile examines the evolution of migration policymaking and trends over the past several decades through the presence of our beloved President Rodrigo Roa Duterte. So, that is my report all about
about the citizens of globalizations. So globalization citizen is someone who is aware of and understands the wider world and their place in it. They take an active role in their community and work with other countries to make our planet more peaceful. Also, the sustainables and fairer, so that the global citizenships helps young people to build their own understandings of world's events. Global citizens is someone who sees themselves as a part of an emerging sustainable world community and whose actions support the values and practices of the community. Many people today identify with being a global citizens as a more and more aspects of their lives. So become a globalized the citizens the citizenship nurtures a personal respect and respect for others wherever they live. It encourages individuals to think deeply and critically about what is equitable and just, what will minimize harm to our planet. Citizenships of globalizations helps young people to build their own understandings of world's events, think about their values and what's important to them, take learning into the real world. And other significant of global citizens trying to understand other people and also have an empathy for them. And global citizens act fairly in their choices, their decisions, and their words. The global citizenships of globalizations others believe that they are just as important as everyone else. Global citizens believes that all people are equal.
Good day everyone, and especially to you sir. My name is Sigi Jurayan, and my topic is all about what is global migration in contemporary world. So, a situation in which people go to live in foreign countries, especially in order to find work. Most global migration is from developing countries to developed ones. And what does contemporary migration? So, contemporary migration involves moving from one place to another, and it is impacted by three main complicating concepts. Number one, explore the patterns and impacts of modern migration, and review example of labor migration, forced migration, and urbanization. And the importance of global migration is boost the working age population. Migrants arrive with skills and contribute to human capital development of receiving countries. Migrants also contribute to technology's progress. Understanding this impact is important if our societies are to useful debate the role of migration. So, migration has been a part of human history since its very beginning. People have migrated from one continent to the other, from country to country or inside the same country. Even though the 21st century has called the age of migration. Castle and Miller, 2009, migration is certainly not a recent phenomenon. But this phrase is widely accepted essentially because there are more migrants in the world today than even before. About 244 million international migrants in 2015. But it is very important to emphasize the number of world population is the highest in the history too, with 7.5 million in 2016. So it might not be surprising that there are more migrants in the world. As well, the overall number of international migrants has increased in the last few years from the 152 million in 1990 to 173 million in 2000. And as mentioned above, to 244 million in the present. That means that if international migrants live in one country, they will constitute the fifth most population country in the world after China, India, US, and Indonesia. What might be more notable is that the proportion of international migrants has not changed significantly since 1995, at around 3%. On the other hand, the estimated number of internal migrants is 763 million. Together with the international migrant, every 7th person in the world is migrant. United Nations Population Division, in short, UNDP, into 2013. United Nations, in short, UN, into 2016. International Organization for Migration, in short, IOM, into 2016. In general, it is expected that the number of international migrants worldwide will be increased in the future. And the major drives of migration will be demographic factor, economic disparities, and environmental changes. So there are 4 types of migration, and that report will be reported by Clint Morales. So that's all. Thank you.
So, 4 types of migration. Migration processes are not homogeneous, and different kinds of migration must be considered in the study of this phenomenon, especially when linking migration to land use change. As noted above in the explanation of the model, people migrate for a range of different reasons, but over the latter half of the 20th century, it became possible to identify 3 main types of international migration. First one is labor and temporary migrations, including illegal migration, forced migration, refugee movements, and international retirement migration, or IRM. There is also internal migration, most commonly from rural areas to urban centers, but also a trend in some places for counter-urbanization. This will be examined in turn. The first one is the labor migration in the EU. Labor migration represents the movement of individuals from one country to another with the purpose of seeking work or responding to recruitment drives in another country. However, in labor migration, it is possible to identify 2 types of migrants. The first one is the highly skilled labor, and second one is the unskilled low-wage labor, including illegal or forced immigrants. The first one is the highly skilled labor migration. The highly skilled labor migration represents only a small percentage of migration, and it is the type of migration most demanded by the host countries, who develop special types of incentives to attract highly skilled labor, often in specific categories, such as doctors and nurses. The attractions of highly skilled labor lies in the ability of the host country to accumulate human capital with no education or training costs. However, the loss of skilled labor, a phenomenon known as the brain drain, can have severe consequences for descending countries.
which lost human capital and all the money invested in the education and training of the people who live. Nevertheless, it can be seen as an attractive solution for solving problems of labor shortage and a way to increase economic production. So, the second one is the unskilled low-wage labor and temporary migration. After 1945, unskilled low-wage labor was the main type of migration which played a very important role in the economic reconstruction of the industrialized countries. Not all of this immigration is legal, and some countries such as the USA or have been very attractive to illegal migrants, especially from Mexico and other Latin American countries that are willing to work in the black economy. In 1988, Sassin, in her approach to the global cities, referred to the dual economy, which uses these low-skilled laborers as a primary source for the low-wage jobs in industry, construction, and domestic service. This constitutes the largest percentage of economic migration and is the process that attracts more attention from the media and social organizations. Unskilled low-wage labor is usually also linked to illegal migrants who clandestinely enter the host country. The second one of the global migration is the forced migration. Forced migration includes not only refugees and asylum seekers fleeing war or political repression, but also people displaced from their homes by projects such as dams or roads, or as a result of certain natural disaster. Casos 2003 has also referred to another mode of forced migration, the trafficking of people with special emphasis on women and children destined for the sex industry. While some countries may be favored destinations for such migration, asylum seekers to Britain have been an issue in recent years. Other countries which do not otherwise feature as places receiving large numbers of labor migration may in fact welcome asylum seekers. Scandinavian countries, for example, the educational level of many refugees, especially asylum seekers, may be quite high. Their excel may result from them being politically active students, for example, or in the case of people displaced by civil war, it may be very low. So, some asylum seekers return to their native country in the circumstances there improve. Many assimilate into the local ethnic communities and become part of the multicultural society, often having relatively low socio-economic status. The third part, or the third type of global migration, is the international retirement migration, or the IRM. The international retirement migration is a phenomenon of the northern countries such as Germany, the UK, and the Nordic countries, characterized by the residential mobility of retired people who have the economic power to buy properties abroad. Retirement is the main push factor to initiate this migration process. As a pull factor, the pleasant climate characterized by warmer temperature, the landscape, and a quality lifestyle associated with a healthier and slower pace of life, also the availability of information about the countries, as well as previous holiday experiences, are all elements that attract immigrants to southern European countries. The major impact of these immigrants in the host countries is the pressure on urbanization and the mass construction of housing in coastal and rural areas. According to the EEA, the coastal zones of Portugal and Spain, along with Ireland, had the highest rates of urbanization, to 20 to 35%. So, in Spain, retired immigrants settled in urbanizations, or the urbanization to residential estates, and the construction of these developments has a large expression in rural towns and villages on the Costa del Sol. The last part of this global migration is the international migration. This type of migration occurs inside a particular country and between regions, especially from economically poor areas and rural parts to major cities. The effects during the 1990s can be explained by the social and economic disadvantages of living in some areas. This trend, which had occurred in Western Europe for centuries, had been more or less arrested in the Eastern Bloc due to social controls, but once the socialist system collapsed along with the economies, large-scale immigration occurred which, with the incorporation of many of these countries into the EU, became transformed into international labor migration. The patterns of the international migration can be quite complex and have profound effect on land use as well become clear. So that's all, and thank you.
So, good afternoon, sir. My name is James Carlo Valenzona, and my topic is all about why there is global migration. So, first, international migration occurs when people cross states boundaries and stay in the host state for some minimum length of time. So, migration occurs for many reasons. Many people leave their home countries in order to look for economic opportunities in another country. So others migrate to be with family members who have migrated, or because of political conditions in their countries. Education is another reason for international migration, as students pursue their studies abroad. So while there are several different potential systems for categorizing international migrants, one system organizes them into 9 groups. So the first is temporary labor migrant, and the second is irregular or illegal or undocumented migrants, and the third is highly skilled and business migrants. The fourth is refugees, the fifth is asylum seekers, the sixth is forced migration, the seventh is family members, the eighth is return migrants, and number 9 is long-term low-skilled migrants. So these migrants can also be divided into 2 large groups. So the first is the permanent and the second is temporary. So the first is permanent migrants. So these intend to establish their permanent residence in a new country and possibly obtain that country's citizenship. And the second is the temporary migrants. So these intend only to stay for a limited period of time, perhaps until the end of a particular program of study or for the duration of their work contract or a certain work session. So both types of migrants have a significant effect on the economies and societies of the chosen destination country and the country of origin. And the countries which receives these migrants are often grouped into 4 categories. So the first is traditional settlement countries. The second is European countries which encourage labor migration after World War II. The third is European countries which receive a significant portion of their immigrant populations from their former colonies. And next is countries which formerly were points of immigration but have recently emerged as immigrants' destinations. So these countries are grouped according to a dichotomy, either migrant sending or migrant receiving countries, which have distinct governance issues. But this dichotomy is artificial and it obscures issues from view. For example, when a net migrant sending country is also receiver of migrants. So all things considered, countries like the UAE have the most comprehensive multicultural population, accounting for almost 84% of the total population. Not only UAE, but countries like Qatar also has 74%. Kuwait has 60% and Bahrain has 55% of their entire population are full of diverse people who immigrate from different countries such as India, Bangladesh, and Pakistan, which increased population by 500% over the increase from 1.3 million in 1990 to 7.8 million in 2013. Compared with the two governments in the United States, the Trump administration doubled the number of asylum and refugee seekers in the previous Obama administrations by 12,000, and by 2020 it will only be 18,000. According to data from the Immigration and Border Service, claims accepted for this year will rise to almost 3 times those of previous years, while only less than previous administrations have been accepted. The number of reports returned to the Obama administration is 110,000, reaching 668,000 by 2020. In these years, economic development enabled by remittances, transnational activism in support of outgoing migrants' rights, as well as rights for incoming migrants are issues. As people began to immigrate to different countries to support them financially, they also contributed to their country's economy by sending their income as remittances. According to a report by the World Bank, officials said that people from different countries remitted nearly $400 billion in 2015. And this is increasing every year with an increase of 0.4%, reaching to $586 billion in the following year.
So, what are the advantages or disadvantages of sending and receiving countries? So, advantages and disadvantages of migration can bring advantage and disadvantage. So, the country which losing people, also the host country. Advantages: country losing people, money sent home by migrants. Disadvantages: people of working age move out, reducing the size of country's potential workforce. The advantages: decreases pressure on jobs and resources. Disadvantages: gender imbalances are caused. It is typically men who seek to the employment elsewhere. Women and children are left. Advantages: migrants may return with new skills. Disadvantages: brain drain if many skilled workers have receiving advantage. A richer and more diverse culture. Disadvantages: increasing cost of services such as healthcare and education. Advantages: helps to reduce any labor shortage. Disadvantages: overcrowding. Migrants are more prepared to take on low-paid, low-skilled jobs. Disadvantages: disagreements between different religions and cultures. So this is also the benefits of sending countries. The advantages: one element of immigration is seen to benefit the sending country is payment of remittance, the sending of money back home. This large intents of money developed world power developing world often key to the economic of the development. So the this is also the advantages and the disadvantages. One element of immigration is seen to benefit sending country. The payment of this large transfer of money from prosperous developed world to poorer developing world are often viewed as key to later economic development.
So, the movement of people across international borders, in the form of immigration, international student flows, business travels, and tourism is referred to as people flows. Despite its little role in globalization debates, migration of people from low income to high income nations is critical for global economic development with implications for factor endowments, trade patterns, and technology transfer. So the dispersion of pay for comparably skilled individuals around the world exceeds the dispersions of commodities, price, and capital costs, in part because people flows are less than trade and capital flows. This shows that initiatives that increase access to advanced nation labor markets for employees from developing countries could significantly improve the global economic well-being. The economic issues that immigrants, rather than citizens of immigrant receiving countries, get the greatest economic benefits from immigrations.